of my articles are at activistpost.com as well. So just a thumbs up to them and say thank you very much.
Well, no, thank you, Julie Beale, very much for being on Dialect today.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Representing the entire city, this is BCFM 93.2.
And I'm joined now by Jason Yiannopoulos. Hi, Jason.
Hello, Tony.
All right, now we're going to have a look at Private Eye with this wonderful picture of Rebekah Brooks on the front. I'm not sure if we're allowed to talk about Rebekah Brooks since there's this active court case, but one thing we can say is she used to be the editor of the News of the World, and the News of the World is no more. Hooray!
Hooray! Round of applause.
I hope that's not prejudicing a trial. I don't think that is.
No, that's just stating what a piece of rubbish we thought the paper was.
And also, I think it's fair to say that it looks like she may have had a very close relationship with Andy Coulson whilst her husband is stood next to her in the courtroom. That's rather a weird thing to have to be told.
Yes. It was a little bit more than a working relationship. I mean, it was a working relationship, but in more ways than one.
Yes, but it didn't work, apparently. Anyway, getting on to the sort of general theme this evening, I want to start off by talking about the JFK assassination. We had a few weeks ago, didn't we, that Guns and Butter Garrison interview. And I wanted to look this week at really the context of the JFK assassination a bit more, because I think when you're getting stuff on the mainstream press about, oh dear, did someone do it? Did one person, another person do it? It's nice to have a bit of good context. And William Cooper is about, well, what is it? It's 50 years since the November 1963 assassination of US President John F. Kennedy, which marked for many the end of freedom in the United States and the beginning of the takeover of the country by the financial elite and the military-industrial complex. A few weeks ago, we played that extract from one of the greatest ever documentaries on the subject. That's the Garrison interview by Californian documentary makers Guns and Butter. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll be hearing, and Jason and I will be discussing afterwards, from another US radio host, though. William Cooper was an ex-naval intelligence officer who had his own FM station and shortwave station based at his home in Arizona. Before his untimely death, just a few weeks after the 9/11 attacks, he actually predicted a massive attack on the United States, which he said would be blamed on Osama bin Laden. Anyway, Bill believed that secret societies following the ancient mystery schools were the real power behind the scenes in many parts of the world. And he was in a position to know, having been right in the middle of the Navy, but we'll leave you to decide on the truth of that by having listened to him. And it was these groups, he said, working within the intelligence services that sacrificed John F. Kennedy on the 22nd of November 1963. So let's have a listen now to the first of these two extracts over the next couple of weeks from William Cooper.
A bolt of lightning struck a tree. The tree burst into flames. Ancient man, if you watched the movie Quest for Fire, rushed up and grabbed one of the burning branches, and it burned his hand and he let it go. He probably didn't go any farther than that the first time. Second time, he may have found a deer that had been roasted by the heat of the fire in the forest, and being hungry, maybe he partook of some of that meat and found that it tasted pretty good. Also, the fire was warm and didn't get cold at night. And this is where the whole battle between the forces of light and darkness comes from. Man sat up on a rock one night watching the sunset and said, "Boy, I'm in deep trouble now. I can't see in the dark. There's wild beasts out there. There's tigers with teeth 7 inches long that want me for dinner. What am I going to do?" He didn't know what to do. Neither would many of us put in that situation. But we would know one thing: we're in deep trouble. And so for a good part of his history, man sat huddled in the darkness in some place that made him feel secure, waiting to be saved. Now remember, folks, I'm not telling you what I believe. I'm telling you what is taught in the mysteries. I'm telling you what our enemies believe. Make no mistake about it, they are our mortal enemies. They want to see us wiped off the face of the earth. Man huddled in this darkness, fearful, trembling, cold, hungry. And around about he could hear the beasts roaring. And sometimes they were roaring because they were after him. And sometimes he was eaten. A man eventually saw another tree struck by lightning and grabbed that branch with that flame on it. And by a little experimentation, he learned how to keep that fire going. And if he could keep the fire going, he knew something nobody else knew, and he became the first king, the first priest, the first scientist, all rolled into one. And he would burn this fire and keep it going. And other men in the cold of the night, wanting to escape from the terrors that were out there, would gravitate toward this glow. And they would see this man sitting there. And if he was kind, he would let them come to the fire. And they would be warm. And they would be protected, because if the wild beast came, he'd pick up a branch and shove it in its face, and the beast would go away. And so the forces of light overcame the forces of darkness, and in the sunshine of the morning, the newly risen, resurrected child that had died the night before, their Savior, warmed them and saved them from the terrors of the Prince of Darkness. You have to study these things to understand your enemy. Any general who ventures upon a battlefield without understanding the enemy is doomed to defeat. Just like a militia that forms itself upon a peninsula has already created its own concentration camp, unless it has a navy. What is the upshot of this? What am I getting at here? These people believe, and they have conducted themselves according to their belief and their philosophy since the very dawn of man. These people learned how to control others through the use of a hidden knowledge. This ability to keep that fire going was a technology that nobody else knew. By observing the fire, by keeping it going, by creating ceremonies around this fire, they became a mystery to the others. A mystery always holds sway over those who don't understand it. And the priesthood was born. No king ever existed without the permission of the priesthood. And I don't care what religion you're talking about or what period of history you're talking about, it is the truth. The kings never had the power and don't to this day. Kings exist at the whim of the real power, which is the priesthood standing behind the throne. And when the king ceased to be of benefit to the priesthood, they would simply poison him or get rid of him in some other way. The king is dead, long live the king, and there would be another king appointed. There was even a time in history when the king was a sacrificial king, just like John F. Kennedy was in the Temple of the Sun known as Dealey Plaza. They would pick a young man at the height of his virility, appoint him king for 1 year. During that time, he could do or say or command whatever he wanted. The priesthood was always there to make sure he commanded the right things, have any woman that he wanted, and at the end of the year, he was ceremoniously sacrificed upon a rock, his heart ripped out, his body dismembered into 14 pieces and scattered over the land. And this is where the legend of the Osirian cycle began. It was to ensure the fertility of the crops of the next year. And young men would volunteer for this in their patriotic duty to their kingdom, to their family, so that they could have prosperous years. Much as our young men may volunteer to rush out over the water to a place called Kuwait or Iraq and die in the God-forsaken sands of a place that nobody can even find on a map and never heard of until it happened. All so that he can be called a patriot, someone his family can be proud of. It escapes me how they can ever arrive at these conclusions, but they do, and the priesthood always takes the most advantage of this willingness to sacrifice oneself upon the altar of his country. The problem with it is very seldom really for the country. It's for the advancement of the agenda of the priesthood, whoever the priests happen to be at the time.
Well, that's William Cooper there speaking in Lansing, Michigan, back in 1996, 4 years before he died, just after the 9/11 attacks. He was shot by the FBI because there was a gunfight outside his house just after the 9/11 attacks, which, bizarrely, he managed to predict. So, Bill Cooper, but Jason, without going too much into some of the stuff he's talking about there, he's talking about America not really being run by the president. I mean, what do you think about, I mean, obviously JFK, he's saying, was sacrificed, but what about Obama? Do you think he's really in charge?
I'd be very surprised if any of the presidents have really been in charge. I think the people in charge are the people who, the History Channel put it wonderfully, as the men who, well, not so wonderfully actually, as the men who built America. We're talking about Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Ford and people like that. And I think, especially in the cases of Rockefeller and Morgan and a few of the other ones, Astor and DuPont, people like that, these are the sort of people that have built dynasties, and these are probably the real power behind America. Bush dynasty, etc. These are people that have been part of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, and yes, so I think the Kennedy assassination, a lot of people say, oh, well, why do people still talk about that? But it was a sort of, I don't know, it was almost like the end of hope in America, because it had been a place where, certainly since World War II, during World War II, before World War II, there had been a lot of, we are going to deal with the problems, this is a real free country. And the people you're talking about who it does look like really run things over there, they're really the industrialists, the people who stand to profit. And, of course, the trouble is, they can profit from war.
And I think they are now. I think they realise that war is such, from their point of view, especially Rockefeller who owns Standard Oil, war is such a profitable business for them.
Good to get shares in these companies, or not?
No.
Well, this is the trouble, isn't it? Of course, they get the best investments seem to come from investing in these elite companies. This is the trouble. It's like if you're going to actually have a decent pension, your pension fund or whatever has to invest in those companies which actually encourage war. I mean, it's that we've got ourselves into a bit of a fix, haven't we?
It's not a great situation to be in, no.
Okay, anyway, we're going to have a bit more from Bill Cooper last week. The reason I picked up on him, of course, is he's talking there about Kennedy having been actually sacrificed by people behind the scenes. I mean, I know you've mentioned on this show months ago the Rosicrucians, these sorts of peculiar secret societies. It's difficult to know what role they have. He certainly is basically, Cooper is saying that Freemasonry is, the tradition, the Freemasons, for example, to say that they started in 1717, I say, balderdash, that this kind of thing has been going on for centuries, for millennia even.
Well, actually, it's interesting. There was, I think it was the History Channel covered it, they had a series which is running now, which is called American Book of Secrets, and the first programme they did was on the Freemasons.
Oh gosh! The thing is, of course, that they are basically cults, religious cults, and their loyalty is to their other people in the cult, not to the rest of us.
Melloc, I think is the name of that.
BCFM 93.2. Bristol is our community.